Hi, fourth graders. This is Ms. K, and we are on lesson 15, which is the last lesson for our geology unit. So the next couple days, we're going to be doing our middle of the year assessment and a pausing point before we move on to unit 6. So your first one we're going to go over is your reading. So it says, today you will read 2 selections related to geology. After reading the first selection, you will answer several questions based on it. Then you will read the second selection and answer several questions based on it. Some of the questions have 2 parts. So this first passage is called Earth's Forces at Work in Japan. Japan shakes when Namazu wiggles his tail. That is the explanation for earthquakes in some of Japan's most famous myths. Namazu is a giant catfish whose nickname is Earthshaker. The Japanese god Kashima tries to keep Namazu quiet. He holds the catfish down under a large stone. Every now and then, however, Kashima gets tired. The stone slips and Namazu swishes his great tail and causes an earthquake. Japan has had a long history of earthquakes, but a mythical catfish isn't what causes them. If you look at a picture of Earth's tectonic plates, you'll see that several tectonic plates come together in the Pacific Ocean near Japan. Some of the plates are sliding or subducting under others. These moving plates release tremendous amounts of energy as they grind past each other. Each burst of energy generates seismic waves that spread through Earth's crust. Seismic waves cause the ground to shake, creating an earthquake. Plate movements trigger hundreds, even thousands of earthquakes in Japan every year. Fortunately, most of these earthquakes are small. You might not even notice the slight shaking of the ground they produce. Every so often, however, Japan is hit by large earthquakes that cause terrible damage. In the past 100 years or so, Japan has experienced 3 major earthquakes. An earthquake that registered 7.9 on the Richter scale struck in 1923. The cities of Tokyo and Yokohama were badly damaged, and many thousands of people died. In 1995, an earthquake with a magnitude of 6.9 on the Richter scale devastated Kobe, a port city southwest of Tokyo. By far, the strongest earthquake to hit Japan in many centuries occurred on March 11, 2011. The Great Tohoku earthquake, as many people called it, measured 9.0 on the Richter scale. It was the strongest earthquake known to hit Japan in recorded history. It was one of the strongest ever recorded anywhere in the world. The earthquake's epicenter was on the ocean floor off Japan's eastern coast. The 2011 earthquake caused violent shaking that brought many buildings tumbling down. Streets heaved and bridges collapsed. The worst damage, however, came from an enormous tsunami generated by the earthquake. Towering waves, some higher than a 3-story building, crashed ashore and surged far inland. Many thousands of people died in the Great Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their homes. As you might expect in a country that has so many earthquakes, Japan monitors Earth's movements very closely. It has one of the most advanced earthquake early warning systems in the world. Earthquake scientists have installed thousands of seismographs across Japan. These instruments detect the slightest movements in the ground beneath them. They send information about these movements to a central location. When an earthquake strikes, a warning is sent out. The idea is to give people time to move to safer places and quickly protect themselves. The problem is earthquakes almost always strike suddenly and happen very quickly. Japan's earthquake warning system issued a warning for the 2011 earthquake. Sendai, the largest city closest to the epicenter, had just 15 seconds of warning before the shaking began. In addition to frequent earthquakes, Japan also has volcanoes. The country lies along the Pacific Ocean's volcanic ring of fire. Japan has more than 100 active volcanoes. People often link volcanoes, like earthquakes, with terrible destruction. But volcanoes can also be creative natural forces. In Japan, you can see this creative power in action. A new volcanic island is forming off Japan's coast. In late November 2013, an underwater volcano erupted near the Bonin Islands, a small island chain south of Japan. Enough lava erupted from the volcano's top to form a dome of igneous rock that stuck up above the ocean's surface. Pictures taken by satellites show that the seawater around this new tiny island contained minerals, bubbling gases, and seafloor sediments. All of these things were stirred up by the volcanic activity. More eruptions followed. The island grew bigger with each one. Japanese volcano scientists named the new island Nishima. By January 2014, however, Nishima had expanded not just upward, but also outward. It grew large enough to collide with its nearest neighbor, another island called Nishinoshima. The two islands are now one. As long as the eruptions continue, the world's youngest island will keep growing. It is a volcanic work in progress. All right. So here are your questions for this passage. And I'm going to read your second passage. So go ahead and pause me, complete the first section, and then we'll read earthquake myths for section 2. Earthquakes are unpredictable, terrifying geological events. Scientific discoveries have helped explain how and why earthquakes happen. Along North America's western edge, several tectonic plates are slowly coming together or sliding past each other. These plate movements sometimes trigger earthquakes in the states of California, Oregon, and Washington. This movement has been occurring for thousands of years. In centuries past, people didn't have the scientific knowledge we do today. Native American tribes along the West Coast created myths to help explain Earth's sudden shaking. The main characters in many of these earthquake myths are animals. The myths tell of times when these animals moved or fought, making the earth tremble. The Gabrielino Indians originally lived in Southern California's San Gabriel Valley, where earthquakes are common. The Gabrielino have an earthquake myth about the Great Spirit and 7 gigantic turtles. According to this myth, the earth was originally a vast ocean. Long ago, the Great Spirit lived high above the earth. When he looked down, he saw water and nothing else. After a while, he grew tired of this watery world and decided to create land. But he needed a firm foundation on which to start building. Just as the Great Spirit was wondering how to begin, an enormous turtle swam past. The turtle's rounded shell rose above the water's surface. The Great Spirit had an idea. Perhaps the turtle's shell would form a solid base on which to build. The turtle was big, but not big enough for the land the Great Spirit had in mind. From the sky, the Great Spirit called down in a loud voice, "Turtle," he said, "swim through the ocean. Find more turtles as big as you are and bring them to me." The turtle slowly nodded and promised he would, then swam off while the Great Spirit waited. The turtle was true to his word. He returned with several other turtles, all impressively huge. The Great Spirit asked the turtles to all move close together so their great shells touched. Then he commanded in a powerful voice, "Don't move." The turtles stopped moving and the Great Spirit went to work. He piled soil on the turtle's shells and patted it firmly down. He created trees and bushes and other plants and stuck them in the soil. He added rivers and mountains and lakes. Finally, the Great Spirit looked at the land and was very pleased. "I am finished," he announced to the turtles. "Now just remember, don't move." For a while, the turtles obeyed, but eventually their legs grew stiff and their minds grew bored. "We should swim," suggested one turtle. The others thought this was a good idea, but the turtles couldn't agree on which direction to go. They argued and argued. Finally, the turtles got so angry that some swam in one direction and the rest in another. The land on their backs rumbled and shook, and big cracks appeared in the soil. From high above, a voice boomed out, "I said, don't move." The turtles obeyed, the shaking stopped, and the land was peaceful again. Every once in a while, the turtles will start arguing again. They want to move, but can't decide which direction to go. So they start moving in different directions, making the ground shake. When that happens, the Great Spirit calls down and reminds them again to be still. Several tribes from what is now northern Oregon, Washington, and Vancouver Island have myths that tell the struggle between Thunderbird and Whale. According to a whole version of the myth, Whale, a huge killer whale, was destroying all the other whales in the ocean. The Hoh people made it their home on the Olympic Peninsula and depended on these whales for food and oil. From high in her mountaintop nest, Thunderbird saw how the Ho people suffered, and she decided to intervene. Thunderbird flew out over the ocean. She hovered, waited. When Whale came to the surface for a breath, Thunderbird swooped down. She grabbed him with her sharp claws, yanked him out of the water, and started carrying him to her nest. But Whale was very heavy. Thunderbird needed to rest before she had gone very far. She landed on ground along the coast and released her grip a little. Whale twisted free and began to fight. As Thunderbird and Whale struggled, trees were torn up by the roots. The ground all around rumbled and shook. Finally, Whale paused for a breath. Thunderbird saw her chance and caught hold of him again. She took off, carrying Whale farther up the coast. Soon, though, she had to land to rest her wings. The moment Thunderbird's claws relaxed just a little, Whale wriggled loose. The two great beasts fought again. As they thrashed and stomped on the ground, it trembled and shivered and shook. Again, Thunderbird managed to get a grip on Whale once more when he paused to catch his breath. This time, she flew all the way up to her mountaintop nest. There, the two great beasts had one final, last terrible battle. The shaking of the ground could be felt for miles. Huge patches of trees were swept away, leaving bare spots on the mountainside. Eventually, Thunderbird triumphed over Whale, and the remains of their battle are still visible today on the Olympic Peninsula. All right, go ahead and answer your questions for the rest of this section. And the last part of your assessment is the writing. So you're going to write a short answer comparing and contrasting the causes and effects of earthquakes you read about in Japan and both myths. Discuss how the causes and effects of earthquakes are similar and different. So you're going to think, how were these earthquakes caused? Think about the Japan reading, and then think about those myths that we just talked about. How are they similar? How are they different? And then think about the effects. What happened because of these earthquakes? And be sure to give evidence from the text for your similarities and differences. All right, that is all for reading. I'm going to make a separate video for skills today, so head on over to that Google form to watch that video. Have a great rest of your day, guys.